Hello everyone. Today, Group 7 will be presenting an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations by Adam Smith. We will be focusing on Book 4 titled Of Systems of Political Economy. So for today's presentation, Wen Gu will be presenting chapters 1 and 2, Daisy Torres will be presenting chapters 3 and 4, Cindy Tran will be presenting chapters 5 and 6, Angela Carrillo will be presenting chapter 7, and Mai Hu will be presenting chapters 8 and 9.
Hi, Professor. My name is Wen Gu, and I am presenting an inquiry into the nature and the causes of the wealth of nations, Book 4, Chapter 1 of the Principle of the Commercial or Mercantile System, and Chapter 2 of Restraint upon the importation from foreign countries of such goods as can be produced at home. In the first chapter, Adam mercilessly criticized mercantilism. In the eyes of mercantilist rulers, the wealth of a country is not the labor and the goods produced by its people, but money. The advocates of mercantilism do not realize that the development of productive force is the key to the growth of national wealth. Instead, they only see the world's greed and thirst for gold and silver, and blindly pursue the growth of gold and silver. Trade is easier to earn money than hard work and economy. There's one way to make more money from trade is to increase the import of money and reduce the export of money. In order to achieve this goal, the intervention and the protection of national team trade is particularly important. Generally speaking, the main means of state intervention in trade includes two categories. The first is restriction on imports, the second is to reward output. After the people have engaged in the business they are good at, the domestic residents must be able to exchange the surplus of the products they produce with the surplus of the products produced by the foreign residents, so as to ensure that they can obtain the necessaries of life that they cannot produce or have low productivities. Through this free exchange, both trading nations can focus on what they are good at producing or what geography allows them to produce, which increases productivity and improves production. To the benefit of people of both countries, however, free trade should also be limited. Adam believed that there were two areas where countries could and should restrict trade. It is advantageous to increase the burden of same industry in foreign countries so as to reward the same industry in China. The second, although the product of an industry are the domestic origin, they must be taxed at home.
Hi everyone, my name is Daisy Torres, and I will be presenting Chapter 3 of the Extraordinary Restraints upon the Importation of Goods of Almost All Kinds from those countries with which the balance is supposed to be disadvantageous, and I will also be presenting Chapter 4 of Drawbacks. So Chapter 3 is separated into two parts. In Part 1, Smith mentions the balance of trade, which is the difference between the value of a nation's imports and exports for a specific period. Most nations want to export more goods than import goods in order to get a trade surplus. Smith goes on to discuss nations' tactics to get a favorable balance of trade. Many will opt to charge higher duties, which are taxes, to discourage imported goods. For example, the impost of 1962 subjected French goods that were being imported to Great Britain be charged a duty of 25% of the rate, while other nations did not have to undergo this tax rate. Smith dedicates a section of Part 1 to digress from the topic previously discussed and talks about the banks of Amsterdam. In exchange for banknotes, merchants would deposit bullion, which is gold or silver in the form of bars or coins. This avoided the issues of handling coins, such as being robbed or reduction of value of its currency. The banks would offer credit to merchants when they deposited gold or silver bullion in order to facilitate this trade. They would also grant a receipt that allowed merchants to withdraw within 6 months as long as they paid the amount of money that equates to the credit given to them along with a certain percentage of the bullion that was deposited. If no payment is made or the term expires, the bank gets to keep the deposit or credit, which is why Smith refers to this as the warehouse rent. For Part 2 from Chapter 3, Smith discusses that all trades are advantageous for all parties, but it may benefit one party more. He notes how Britain would most likely benefit the trade with France up to 3 times more than the trade between North America. Smith dives into prejudice and distrust, and says it is the reason why countries will often attempt to not allow other countries from prospering. They go as far as hurting their own economy to ensure their neighboring country does not become economically stronger. Smith criticizes nations who do this, and states that although during a war it may not be the best, having wealthy nations as neighbors actually benefits the surrounding countries because it creates a better market. For Chapter 4, titled Of Drawbacks, Smith explains that merchants want to sell their goods to the foreign market because they are dissatisfied with the monopoly of their home market. Drawbacks give merchants the ability to recover part of the duty charged on imported goods that will be re-exported to the foreign market. Unless the exported goods are actually going to the foreign market, the drawbacks are essentially useless. However, some merchants abuse this system and would secretly smuggle goods that receive benefits from drawbacks, such as tobacco. They consume the goods in their home country and as a result would hurt the business of a fair trader along with their revenue.
Hi, my name is Angela Carrillo, and the part of the book that I will be presenting is on Of Colonies, and I'll be going through 3 parts that are within it. Part 1, which is of the motives for establishing the colonies. So many Greek colonies were sent out, and the populations at home would grow too great, and the mother country would claim no authority against them. The colonies of the Dorians resorted mainly to Italy and Sicily, and were populated by barbarous and uncivilized nations, mainly the Ionians and Aeolians. 2 other great tribes of the Greeks were sent to Asia Minor and to the islands of the Aegean Sea. The inhabitants seemed at that time to have been pretty much in the same state as those of Sicily and Italy. Roman colonies were sent out to establish the demand for new land and to establish garrisons in conquered territories. Now the Romans, their motherland, claimed authority over them. They're entirely subject to them. We're never sure why the Roman colonies established themselves or their motives, but we can see that it is obviously a different one from the Greeks. Although both were different from each other, both derived from their origin from the irresistible necessity or from clear and evident utility. The use of the American colonies is then obvious. The Venetians, they had a profitable trade in East India goods, which was envied by the Portuguese and led them to discover the Cape of Good Hope Passage, while Columbus tried to reach the East Indies by sailing westward. From the port of Palos in August He sailed from the port of Palos in August 1492, nearly 5 years before the expedition of Vasco da Gama set out from Portugal, and after a voyage of between 2 to 3 months, he discovered first some of the small Bahamas or Lincoln Islands, and afterwards the great island of St. Domingo. Columbus had mistook the countries that he had found for the Indies, which gives them their names, East and West Indies. The countries that were discovered were not rich in animals or vegetables, and cotton wasn't considered a great outcome, so Columbus then relied on the minerals that produced, which were gold and silver. The Council of Castiles, which was a decision-making body, and it was only partially successful. They were drawn to the gold and the silver, so Columbus proposed that the government should have half of the gold and silver that was discovered. The proposal was then approved by this council. The tax that came later for the silver had continued for a long time and was reduced only a tenth in the course of the present century. The first adventurers didn't have much need or want for silver due to the gold being, in such high demand and catching their attention the most. Not long after, the tax for this became too high and soon after had to be reduced. When others got the news about the tax, they soon had to make a quick decision on whether they would stay or whether they would leave the country. A prudent lawgiver would not wish to encourage gold and silver mining, but people have always believed in an El Dorado, which is a tale of a golden city that was told by Sir Walter Raleigh. Every Spaniard who had sailed to America had expected to find their El Dorado. I'm now going to cover part 2, which is causes of the prosperity of the new colonies, and within that I will be covering the colonists taking out the knowledge and regular government, as well as the progress of the colonies, which were the Greek, the Roman, English, Spaniard, Portuguese, Swedish, and Dutch and French. Also, I will be talking about the list of commodities that would have competed with the British market, as well as the freedom of trade. So colonists started to take out knowledge and regular government. The land was said to be plentiful and cheap, although wages were high. The children were taken care of, and they were profitable. Fully grown, the high price of labor and the low price of land gave them the opportunity to establish themselves the same way that those who had settled before them did. Population and improvement meant wealth and greatness were encouraged. The progress of the Greek colonies were very rapid, and many of them seemed to have surpassed their mother cities or their mother countries. They were all independent from their mother country, and they were all able to manage their own affairs by how they judged and seemed suitable to their own interests. The Roman colonies were not doing as well as the Greek colonies, almost being the opposite due to the fact that they were not independent from their mother cities or countries, nor were they able to judge their own affairs by how they seemed suitable. The American colonies had plenty of land and not very much interference from their mother countries. The Spanish colonies, such as Mexico and Peru, had been very considerable. They attracted the attention of their mother countries due to the gold and silver that came out of them. Spanish colonies were considered less populous and thriving than those of almost any European colony, and the Spanish Creoles in many respects were superior to the ancient Indians. The Portuguese colony of Brazil were very populated. In this colony, it is said to have more than 600,000 people, either Portuguese or descendant from Portuguese, Creoles, mulattoes, and a mixed race between Portuguese and Brazilians. Towards the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century, Spain and Portugal were the two greatest naval in the ocean. The Spaniards tried to claim whatever they can, and when the French tried to settle in Florida, they were taken out by the Spaniards, and eventually a decline of the naval power of this latter nation led to their defeat of what they then called their invincible armada. After being able to stop any other settlements, the English, French, Dutch, Danes, and Swedes all tried to make some type of settlements in the New World. The French colony of Canada had showed some rapid progress after the dissolution of the exclusive company, while the French colony of Saint Domingo was thriving, even though they faced various obstacles. The progress of the English colonies had been the most rapid. Although their land was not as great as the Spanish and Portuguese, their institutions were more favorable to its improvement. The engrossing of uncultivated land had been more restrained. Taxes were more moderate. The trade monopoly of the mother country had been less oppressive, since there was no exclusive company that was willing to buy the produce of the colonies as cheap as possible, nor were there any restriction of commerce to a particular port or to a particular licensed ships, but the freedom for every subject to trade with every port in the mother country, and freedom to export everything but the listed commodities to other places besides the mother country. Some of the most important productions are not listed, such as grain, timber, cattle, fish, sugar, and rum. Grain, meat, and fish would have competed too strongly with the British produce if it was forced into the British market. Originally, non-listed commodities would be exported to any part of the world. They had recently been confined to countries south of Cape Finisterre. This is part 3, the last part of colony, which is of the advantages which Europe has derived from the discovery of America and from that of a passage to the East Indies by the Cape of Good Hope. Within this part, I'll be discussing advantages derived by Europe from America, the propositions for parliament to tax colonies, and the mercantile system. The advantages derived by Europe from America are the advantages of Europe in general and the advantages to the European arc. Which is an increase of enjoyments and an augmentation of industry, not only in the countries which traded with America directly, but also in the other countries which did not send their produce to America or even receive any produce from America. The exclusive trade from the mother countries reduced the enjoyments and industry of all Europe and America. Another advantage would be the advantage of the particular countries which have colonies. Those particular advantages are the common advantages derived from provinces, which could be the common advantages of contribution of military forces and revenue, but none of these colonies had ever furnished military force. Another advantage would be the peculiar advantage derived from the provinces in America. Another advantage would be the peculiar advantage derived from the provinces in America, and this is the exclusive trade, which makes it the sole peculiar advantage. The exclusive trade of each country was a disadvantage to other countries rather than an advantage to that country. For example, England got tobacco cheaper than France, but not cheaper than it would have gotten if there was no exclusive trade. The monopoly had kept the British trade higher than it may have normally been, and this could have put the country in a disadvantage in the trades of which she has no monopoly, making her buy less and sell less, and enabling other countries to undersell in foreign market. The monopoly itself was bad, but the trade itself was good. The trade in its natural state increased the productive labor in Great Britain, although the monopoly diminished it. Although the colonial assemblies would have never voted enough and had no knowledge of what was required, it had been proposed that Parliament should tax the colonies by requisition as the King of France had taxed some of his provinces. But Parliament had no sufficient authority. Representation in Parliament in proportion to taxation should have been offered, otherwise it would seem hopeless to expect submission, and resistance would have been there. Now, a mercantile system is a system that's used to manage the economy of a country through the regulation of its foreign trade. The goal of it is to establish a permanent positive balance of trade. The countries which possess America and trade to the East Indies appeared to get all the advantage, but this is not the case. The monopoly regulation sometimes harmed the country which established them more than others. The mother countries had also engrossed only the expense and inconveniences of possessing colonies. Portuguese attempted at first to exclude all the other nations from trading in the Indian Seas, and the Dutch still excluded all nations from trade with the Spice Islands. Part 3 of Colonies ends with the administration in India thinking of only buying cheap and selling its members' trade on their own account, and it says that they cannot be prevented from doing so. They weren't prevented from doing so, and this private trade was more extensive and harmful than the public trade of the company. It also continues on to talk about how the servants is not like the real interest of the company, the same as that of the country. They believe that the evil came from the system and not from the character of the men who administered it, and they also believe that exclusive companies were nuisances.
Hi, this is Mai Hun and I'm gonna go over 2 chapters. Chapter 8, the conclusion of mercantile system, in Chapter 9, of the agricultural system, or of those system of political economy which represent the produce of land as either the sole or the principal source of the revenue and wealth every country. In Chapter 8, there are 2 main points. Smith's arguments against the international political economy oppose the idea of mercantile system, and his conclusion on mercantilism. So what is mercantile system? For Smith, mercantile system basically refer to when a government discourages exportation and encourage importation with the thought that this will make the country wealthier. In some cases, countries have prohibited the exporting of machinery to other countries as they are afraid of other countries could establish competing business. There have also been laws against English business people moving to other countries to practice the same business, and that is the sign of mercantilism. Smith believed that it is wrong to think that the economies are based on production instead of consumption. Goods are worthless unless there are people ready to consume them, and the production eventually must meet the demand of the consumption. So, in Smith's conclusion, it is clear that producers who created mercantile system, not the general public of consumers, because those producers wanted to protect their interests. Moving on, chapter 9, we're going to find out what is the role of agriculture in the economy and the importance of needs produce, or what we call net produce today.
The other way to organizing an economy is to put agriculture, a form of pure production, in the privilege. Manufactured goods are nice, but in Smith's opinion, they forget to add the value of raw material in it. Next, we're going to define the net produce or net produce. Net produce is different from cross produce. So let's talk about this term. Your cross produce is everything that you produce on the crops and everything that you create. Your net or your net produce is what you have left after you paid for your expenses. So let's say you grow $100 worth of potatoes. You pay $20 to rent your farmland and another $20 to rent your machines and pay your pickers. So you have only $60 left, and this is what we call net produce. For Smith, we must always look at net produce to figure out whether a country is wealthy or not. Even though Smith prefers agriculture, he doesn't want the government to give subsidies to farmers because he believes that free market will make them produce more.
So the three key lessons are the following: the flaws of the mercantile system, the way states foster exports in the mercantile system, and the tasks of the states. Thank you for listening, and that concludes our presentation.